Shalem and welcome to Jerusalem Studio. 4 weeks after the horrific blast on the port of Beirut, which killed close to 200 people, wounded thousands more, and brought about the resignation of the cabinet, Lebanon is still beset by a series of crises, health, corruption, and long-lasting political deadlock due to foreign influences. Is there a cure for the Lebanese problem? Joining our panel from the Turkish city of Istanbul is Dr. Nir Boms, who is a research fellow at the Moshe Dayan Center at Tel Aviv University. Welcome.
Thank you.
Also joining today's panel from Central Israel is Dr. Eran Lerman, who is the vice president of the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security and a lecturer at Shalem College. Welcome.
Thank you, James.
And I'd like also to welcome our TV7 analyst, Mr. Amir Oren, and immediately dive into today's program, grant us a broader understanding of the current situation in Lebanon and how all of this is interconnected on a regional scale as well.
Well, in more than 70 years of sovereignty, Lebanon was always neither cohesive nor independent in the full sense of the words. But right now, it is in one of the worst crises of its existence. And an additional event which should be mentioned is what happened with the tribunal, whose verdict was ostensibly against Hezbollah, but really for it, because it targeted only one individual who was a Hezbollah operative, but let Hassan Nasrallah say that his organization was cleared by the tribunal because there was no connection established between this particular individual and Hezbollah at large. And this is part of the political battle on what is happening ever since the Hassan Diab cabinet resigned after less than 8 months in office. Obviously, Hezbollah, backed by Iran, is the major force within Lebanon, but there are so many foreign influences meddling in Lebanese affairs that one cannot see any way out of this morass.
Indeed. Dr. Lerman, I'd like to ask you, to what degree is the current power balance within Lebanon, if you will, extremely in Hezbollah's favor and the favor of its Iranian patrons who are influencing also the decision makers in Beirut after such a horrendous explosion devastated that place? Not only did it render incapacitated a lot of the Christian neighborhood of that city, which is the territory or the area where is predominantly Christian, it also weakened its capacity to emerge more of an independent state after being pretty much more reliant now after this explosion on foreign aid, on foreign assistance. Of course, the Turks came in to pledge to assist, also to rebuild the port, and also the French are very adamant on participating in a bigger role. Give us a better understanding of the situation there.
Yeah. If you count guns, if you count the capacity for raw violence, there's nothing yet within sight, within the foreseeable future, that can compete with the predominance of Hezbollah and its Iranian masters. And clearly, as you can hear from Lebanese here and there, Lebanon, in that sense, is an occupied country. It's occupied by a foreign, an entity controlled and subservient to the interests of a foreign power. Hezbollah may have its pretense to be a normal Lebanese political entity, but it is also a proxy force of the Iranian state and its actions, particularly vis-a-vis Israel, but also in Syria and in support of Shiite revolutionary activities across the region, in close coordination with Qasem Soleimani when he was still alive, all of this has made Hezbollah very clearly into a tool a key tool, a very vital tool in Iranian regional strategy. So now the question is really whether the only thing to count under these circumstances is how many guns do they have. Remember the famous saying attributed to Field Marshal Stalin about the Pope. How many divisions does he have? Well, at the end of the day, it was the Pope who, to some extent, broke the back of the Soviet Empire in Poland. So I'm not quite sure that guns are the only thing you should count. Two other things, I think, count in literally. One is people on the streets saying things about the existing system, including Hezbollah, that nobody dared to say before. Not even in the demonstrations of March 2005 after the Hariri murder. People from within the Shia community coming up and saying, you know, you may have seen the short video of Subhi Tfaili, basically suggesting that the entire Lebanese leadership and Hezbollah and Hassan Nasrallah, first of all, should go to the gallows. And
who used to be a very staunch ally of Hezbollah proper.
He was a Secretary General of the organization way back before Hassan Nasrallah made himself synonymous with Hezbollah. But so it's a question of whether there are still enough people in Lebanon, young people in particular, who feel that they are Lebanese, and that may decide the matter in the long run. And the third thing to count, frankly, is the money. Lebanon is broke. The sheer cost of reconstruction after the devastating ammonium nitrate explosion may come to $15 billion. This is clearly due to negligence, criminal negligence by the existing elite, and Hezbollah is to some extent, one way or the other, complicit in what happened. Mm-hmm. Now, that money is not coming from Iran for a simple reason. The Iranian system is broke. It's broke because of the American sanctions, it's broke because it's dysfunctional, and it's broke because oil prices are right now swimming somewhere near the bottom. So Iran cannot do it. Turkey may have some money, Qatari money, really, not Turkish money. So ultimately, it may come back to park in the West. And here the decisive question will be with France and perhaps an American administration that can make decisions. Right now, we see no inclination in the United States to invest in the future of Lebanon. Can they actually lay down new rules? Macron has already said during his visit, things will not go back to where they were. Things cannot go back to the corrupt, dysfunctional system. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, we face one or two possibilities. A return to the corrupt system as it is now and a slide towards the economic abyss, or possibly a breakup of Lebanon along confessional lines, which is not a very good idea, but you can hear some rumblings about Sunni and Christian and Shiite separationist elements saying if the system is not fixed, we may have to go our different ways.
And those rumblings are very vocal in recent weeks. Dr. Boms, these rumblings occurred already before the Beirut blast, just less vocal for that matter. And I heard also from people I spoke with in Lebanon, in particular also from the Sunni camp, that they don't necessarily look up towards Saudi Arabia anymore, as was the situation in the past. Rather, they're more inclined on looking northwards towards the Turks, who have shown more will to really get their hands dirty, so to speak, and enter into the Lebanese country by supporting the locals there, by showing a lot more their inclination of bolstering the Sunni community, which within that sectarian society is received in a very passionate manner, if I may say so. To what degree do you see now the sectarian divisions being wider and wider as time progresses, bringing in more influence from foreign powers and trying to really carve up sectors of influence for their own interests?
Well, Jonathan, the sectarian divisions are part and parcel of the Lebanese system. Lebanon is an ethnic democracy, at least in theory. In practice, it's closer to a proxy kleptocracy. And in a way, Lebanon could not hold it on its own, and therefore the ruling classes or the ruling coalitions always needed to find equilibrium of power with the right proxies behind them. The Saudis have been pushing from one direction, the Iranians have been pushing from another, and now the Turks have found an opportunity to, in a way, not push or perhaps pull from another direction, which again is fitting within the tradition of sectarianism, because if they're Sunnis and they're willing to offer some help, Lebanon at this point needs every help it can get. This goes back to what Dr. Lerman has just said before. Are we going to see another version of a different balance of power within the Lebanese system, in where Turkey will take the place of Saudi Arabia in the Sunni camp, and Qatar will push some additional funds, and that will eventually create a different coalition that will meddle Lebanon forward, or will end up having a whole different system that will change the way Lebanon will look in the future. I certainly agree that I also hear the voices from the street who would say, in Lebanon, who say, well, look, it's about time to do something different. Having another proxy coming into a corrupt system is not going to be the long-term solution. But at this point, Lebanon and the communities would basically take almost anything they can get.
Indeed.
There is also another factor which is quite unique to Lebanon, and in addition, or part of the sectarianism, and that is families or destinies of warlords. Had Rip Van Winkle woken up after 40 or 20 years, he would have still heard the same names. And strangely enough, you also have orphans, like Walid Junbalat, whose father, Kamal Junbalat, was assassinated by the Syrians, or Saad Hariri, whose father, Rafiq, was assassinated by Hezbollah. And they still take part in this game, in which they also coalesce with their tormentors, with their enemies, because this is the only way to survive in Lebanon. And of course, there are the Shamuns and the Frangias and the Jamails. And everyone else. So this is not really a democracy. It's a sort of an aristocracy with guns.
Nevertheless, we did hear the leader of the Christian party, Mr. Jamoun, speak about his unwillingness to continue being part of this system in Lebanon. Of course, they're much less significant than they used to be back in the 60s, 70s onwards. But to what degree was the shift of the Christian parties in Lebanon, in which, of course, excluding the Michel Aoun camp, who is still adamant on maintaining power in the seat of president and being able to steer somehow his allies, including Hezbollah, out of the current crisis, it seems like the Christians who have had in the past a lot of power and were a significant force to be reckoned with are more and more trying to identify themselves with the people on the streets, the people crying out for reform, the people crying out in particular to the West. And when they say to the West, to the Christian West, in order to come and help them in the face of Iranian aggression through Hezbollah and the other denominators in that country. Mr. Lerman, Dr. Lerman, to what degree do you think that this will now culminate into something more on the brink of the capacity of having once again a civil war?
Well, this is where I actually tend to think that Lebanon is on a different trajectory than that of the 70s. At the time, the camps had about roughly the same amount of guns, which is a recipe for war. Now, since Hezbollah broke the Lebanese military forces in battle, I mean the government forces, in battle in May 2008, there's never been a question of Hezbollah having, facing an equal force in the battlefield, in a civil war. So a civil war doesn't seem to me the right tool of analysis here. The question is different. Can Hezbollah be weakened from within by a growing distaste even within the Shia community? Young Shias who want a place in the world, a place in their own country in Lebanon, which does not necessarily flow from the patronage system that Iran can dispense. And there are interesting indications. I've read an interesting essay some time ago by Professor Hillel Frisch of Bar Ilan, who showed that the casualties that Hezbollah mourns are almost always from the fringes, from the Bekaa Valley, from Nabatea, whereas the majority of Shia in Lebanon nowadays have sort of migrated to the Dahia and to Beirut. And there you have a new lower middle class Shia community, which is no longer beholden to Hezbollah for their livelihood and may not quite share this Iranian allegiance and the legend of the Muqawama. They have other things on their plate, or quite specifically, they don't have enough food on their plate. And I think if that is increasingly going to be the nature of the internal Lebanese debate at a time of impoverishment, a country that was once prosperous is on the verge of overtaking Venezuela as a basket case. If that becomes a trans-confessional discussion, and you break away from thinking, well, what are the Christians going to do? What are the Sunnis going to do? Or the Shiites, for that matter. What are young people going to do as young Lebanese? That's where the numbers may be out in the streets where Hezbollah cannot break their back.
Dr. Boms?
And you can add to that. This is the same argument that Dr. Lerman, you stated before, about younger Lebanese who are basically willing to see things differently. It's also about the coalition around Hezbollah. The Christians, their allies, the Analyst, who already said some interesting things, including statements from Oren himself 2 weeks ago that peace with Israel in some circumstances may not be inconceivable. Something that was very surprising to Lebanese ears. Lebanon is, as you've said, not on the brink of a crisis. It's in a deep crisis. 55%, according to a report published last week, below poverty line. And now, after the blast in the port, you've seen letters from different heads of neighborhoods and towns around the south saying, look, we know that there are stockpiles of weapons here. We realize what will happen to us if this is going to explode. Perhaps what we need is the call for naturality, which a number of Lebanese leaders, and the code name for naturality is that Lebanon should not need to take part, and certainly it should not take part in foreign wars in Syria or in a non-existent war against Israel, and therefore we certainly don't need a group like Hezbollah that is stronger than our own military. And that's what naturality means. And if we believe in this, then perhaps the solution is to dismantle Hezbollah or to bring the arms under the auspices or the care of the Lebanese military and have a future that is a little different here. And if we zoom out for a second, this is happening in a period in where the Middle East continues to move and where we are beginning to see some of the Arab world moving, even in the context of Israel, toward a discussion of normalization as an alternative for the way of conflict to try to solve things for the future. And there are some people in Lebanon that are willing to quietly speak this discourse. An interesting case in point is the Israeli aid that was offered to Lebanon. Of course, the Lebanese government would say that they would not accept it, but Lebanese organizations did work with Israelis, and some Israeli aid is actually inside Lebanon as we speak.
But this is the very reason why, through linear logic, one would assume that there is no reason right now for another war between Hezbollah and Israel. But this may be exactly an inverse logic for Hassan Nasrallah. If Hezbollah is going to either disappear or at least be degraded in power, as long as Iran is on the ropes, as long as other international and regional factors are against it, perhaps he will try to break towards a war with Israel. Now, mind you, there is no information right now, no intelligence indicating that this is the case. But if one looks at the prospects which Nasrallah may see ahead of him very soon, this could be the result, even though nothing is going to come out of it for Lebanon and the Lebanese. Only misery will ensue.
That said, we're talking, of course, about a significant deficit in that country. Of course, Dr. Lerman also mentioned the $15 billion that only this blast might cost the city of Beirut. And bringing into the picture, of course, also the maritime exclusive economic zone of Lebanon, which is still under dispute with Israel on certain section of those. To what degree, Dr. Lerman, this is referred to you, do you see this exclusive economic zone being taken into or being used as leverage in order to redevelop Beirut? Of course, we know that Lebanon, before the blast, tried to publish some tenders. The French were part of it, the Italians, the Russians, and the Turks were part of it, something that may also concern very much Israel. And this comes, of course, in line with the whole situation between Greece and Turkey and Cyprus and Israel, which is a big part of this, not taking, of course, out the situation in Libya and so on. Everything is interconnected, so let's keep it focused on the Lebanese front.
Well, quite frankly, Israel has made several overtures during in the years back when I was in government and later, in an attempt to resolve the dispute about this triangle. At what point does the border between Israel and Lebanon, respective exclusive economic zones, EEZs, at what point do they meet the line of the Cypriot EEZ? Is it more to the south, or more, as the Lebanese say, or more to the north? It creates a kind of triangle that goes out from the border, the border on land in Nakora, out towards in the direction of Cyprus. I think Israel was willing to be generous, was willing to offer a significant compromise, because we actually have a mutual interest with Lebanon in developing Eastern Mediterranean energy resources. There were two problems, however. One is that the Lebanese system is so corrupt and so internally divided that it could not make any decisions without everybody getting a piece of the cake. And that basically rendered the work of the various mediators, mainly American mediators, first Amos Hochstein and then David Satterfield, basically ineffectual. The other thing is that right now, the oil prices, energy prices are so depressed that I find it difficult to see that anything being significant enough in a short enough period of time to make a difference in terms of reconstruction in Beirut. The one ray of light in all of this is that with the acquisition of Noble Energy by Chevron, a major American player, one of the famous sisters of the oil, the huge oil company group, like Exxon and others, Chevron is coming into the Eastern Mediterranean with Israeli assets,
Indeed.
with assets in the Israeli EEZ. And they will have, of course, a vested interest in stability and in the prospect of developing these assets so that they are not challenged. So I think that could actually help drive a future Lebanese government. If it really has the interests of Lebanon in mind, towards a compromise solution.
Indeed, which consequently, obviously, will bring national security interests of the United States into this area, even though already noble energy is a significant part of the Israeli gas reservoirs, offshore gas reservoirs, which also attach to it all kind of American laws, which ultimately brings about American defense mechanisms to assure that its national security interests are preserved in this territory. But we're really short on time, and really in short sentences, if you will, Dr. Boms, to what degree are we seeing in the near future a certain shift, or are we heading into the, unfortunately, the abyss?
I hope we're not getting into the abyss. The Lebanese have been in the streets a number of times in this past decade. I think many of them have come back there in order to demand a change. If some of the cards will work correctly, we have a chance to actually bring Lebanon into a better future in an attempt to neutralize some of the radical factors. It will fail to do so, and I think if countries like Turkey, Iran, and Qatar will take the lead, there's a chance that Lebanon will continue with a trajectory that unfortunately will bring its own people back to the streets thereafter. And I hope that that's not where we're going to head.
Unfortunately, this is all the time that we have for today. So next time I will reserve to you, Dr. Lerman, and you, Mr. Oren, more time. But I'd like to thank Dr. Boms, Dr. Lerman, as well as Mr. Oren for being with us here today. And I'd like to thank our viewers as well. And we will see you next time.
You just watched TV7 Jerusalem Studio. We encourage you to pray for the challenges raised in today's program. If you were blessed by our production, please consider supporting TV7 Israel. The details of our respective bank accounts for donations from Europe and the United States appear on the screen. Your generosity allows us to continue to serve God's calling, to broadcast content that truly matters through TV7 Israel from Jerusalem.